Alright X. I don't really trust therapists, and my dad won't talk to me about it. I would have gone on ignoring this, too, if I hadn't started having the nightmares again. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe find some closure. I'm not going to Greentext everything, but a lot of it will be. I'm pre-typing this in Notepad, and just trying to stay cohesive. I live in the high desert of Oregon. I won't go into any more specifics, for obvious reasons. There's 3 characters to this story. Me, my dad, and a friend from soccer, Nick. I'll include some pics as they become relevant of similar places in the Badlands, from Google. I don't have any original pictures of this as back then my phone was a piece of shit just for texting and calls and I wasn't into photography, so I never got a camera. Be me. 15, fall of 2012. Live in a fairly rural part of town, like to be outside, and as I'm homeschooled, Dad tries to get me into extracurricular sports. I make it onto a soccer team that's not really an official team, but it's something to do and I don't get fat, Dad is happy, etc. Make a friend, great forward, his name is Nick. I'm not changing his name because Nick is a fucking common name and I'm bad at making new ones. There's somewhere around 80 Nick people in that town anyways. Towards the cooler season, we 3 decide to go camping. Dad's happy because it's a guy's trip, and that I have a friend. Is happy because he doesn't go that often. I'm happy because I love the desert. Take my family's 2 dogs, German Shepherds, and stuff for a 2-day trip. Dad has 3 guns, 2.22 pistols and a .22 rifle. The pistols are for emergency home/car defense, the rifle is for small game sometimes. They're not big guns but we've never really needed them. Head out to the Badlands. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Pacific Northwest, or Oregon. It is mostly rainy, wet, green, mossy, lush, you name it. However, smack in the lower half of Oregon, there's the Badlands wilderness. The Badlands is fucking intense. Hot as hell in the day, cold as balls at night, and it never really changes by season, just gets colder or hotter. I won't get into the dangerous desert electrical storms. It's full of brush, rock, and thousands of acres of endless sand and short scrub trees, and deadwood. It's like a graveyard, most times, because of all the bones and shit out there. I love it still, even after this, but it's a really, really harsh place to the unprepared. We have hikers that die out there yearly just from weather. A decent amount of it is hiking trails, owned land, etc. But the vast majority of it is undeveloped wasteland. We camp in the wasteland. Drive to a trailhead, walk in a few miles, and then weave off. Dad and I have walked our dogs out here numerous times. We know where we are and where we're going, and there's more landmarks in the way of stones and shit. Dogs are off lead, just doing dog things. Nick, Dad, and I all talking, generally just being dudes, etc. Make it a good 5 or 6 miles off the trail before dark. It's a bit dusky, beautiful sunset, all that shit. Set up in between some rocks. I would have pictures but this was years and years ago. They have been since lost and my phone was dog shit at that time anyways. No fire because law-abiding citizens. Got some cook stoves and shit though. Pop it up outside the tent, roast some hot dogs and BS like that over the tiny ass flame. It's absurd but fun and we're all enjoying it. Dogs get a bit weird as the evening goes on. These are not couch potato ass dogs. One of them was a Schutz Hunt competitor, Reed, trained guard, sport dog. The other was an adopted adult that was generally just a good boy. Commence enjoyment anyways. Dogs eventually settle down, but on alert, low growls. We figure they're just new to this particular area, or maybe there's a scavenger animal. The night passes without any issue. Get up next morning, eat some shitty camp breakfast that we all love because we're outdoors. Dad takes a nap, keeps the .22 pistols but gives Nick and I the .22 rifle. I'm responsible enough to handle it and Nick's not a total retard. Maybe we plink some rabbits or some shit, we think, but really we're just taking pot shots at dead trees and rock formations like retards, squeezing off shots and playing around with the scope. Neither of us are a bad shot, and we're just out exploring and being 15 and 16-year-olds, basically. We have compasses and packs, and like I said, neither of us are full potato. I'll cut the green text for a bit more of a description for this place. It's about a mile north of the broken rock formation where we were camped, across some flat nothingness. It's a small grove-esque clusterfuck of rock chunks and dead trees, maybe a living juniper or two. Not big, not thick, more spread out than lush. Enough cluster to be shady and notably a bit of an oasis from the waste. Nick and I have no fucking idea what's in there, if anything. Could be some coyotes, man, hardcore as hell. We Rambo our asses up there, crouching like it's Skyrim, slowly creeping in. I've got the rifle drawn and a round chambered. It's the desert, though, and we're still being loud enough that no small game would stick around for us anyways. It's quiet, and there's no animals in sight. As we get into the copse, rock and tree cluster, it darkens up a bit and gives a really neat aesthetic to the whole deal. We stop creeping like retards and stand up, and check out the whole area, probably a solid 400 or 500 square feet of loosely collected rock spires, chunks, logs, dead trees, and a couple living trees. Some of the logs and branches fell against a bent tree and some stone like a little natural hut or thicket or whatever. There's a bunch of bones and collected detritus inside, nothing artificial, but there's some stiff, long dead, and dried animal hide scraps. The sand is dark, just general appearances of being a den of sorts. Nick's interested and I'm not too fazed, as this isn't my first time outdoors nor in the Badlands. You get piles of animal bones pretty often if you're looking several miles out. Coyotes just gnaw the fuck out anything dead and leave them in piles. Den smells like a fucking garbage heap mixed with sulfur, absolutely atrocious. We BTFO from that noise after the smell hits us. Continue to inspect the grove, and from now on in the story I'm calling it the grove. There's a climbable tree, technically most of them are, but this one's the most sturdy looking. The problem with Badlands trees is that they're incredibly fragile and breakable, given that even when they're alive, they're very dry. Finding one that my ass can get up without snapping is difficult, as my height and weight are not compatible for these types of things. Prop myself up about 12 feet or so, take a look with the scope, pretty cool. Drop down, Nick's back to looking at the den. We should come back later and see if its owner is home. Technically, even if this owner was home, it wouldn't have been legal to kill it unless this was Monty Python's Death Rabbit, as we didn't have any tags or licenses for coyote or otherwise. Still think it'd be cool to snag a look at something in its home. Nick's never seen this, and though I've seen, and shot, many coyotes, I've never seen one, at home. We agree to do so, but with the dogs just in case. Coyotes are cowards, but this might be a group hideout and we don't want to get nipped before we gun them down for self-defense if necessary. Continue fucking around the rest of the day, go back to find that Dad has walked the dogs and come back, small cook stove fire going. The minute we walk into the camp though, the dogs get very, very upset with us. They sniff us gingerly, and then back away, growling, doing that leaning head tilt like they don't understand. Don't let us near them for a while, they always keep a few feet away and then return to being alert. We tell Dad what we found about a mile up and he tells us about his walk. He agrees to come with us and bring the dogs, if only because he wants to see it too. Evening again, not quite dusk, I'm watching a rabbit fuck around in the distance with the scope, before I get bored and look around in the distance with it. It's absolutely beautiful, the dark stone and brown sand contrasting with the bleached gray trees, the purple sunset, the white thing. Nigga what? Swing the scope back to the white thing, which was previously purged, to my knowledge, on one of the stones in the distance. It's gone now, but would have bet money on it. Pausing green text again for this preliminary description. Didn't really see it too well the first time, on the rock, but it was crouched, either quadrupedal and standing or bipedal and sitting with its arms and hands on the ground. It wasn't especially big at first, but that may have been the distance. Bleached white like a bone, not really much detail at the range I was in. Continue observing for the white thing, maybe it's a pale coyote or something else, but don't catch a glimpse of it. Based on where I saw it, it was maybe directly or slightly off kilter to our west. Ask Dad if coyotes can be albino. Basically get a response of yes you fucking retard. Aren't you in school? Shrug. Call it an albino coyote and forget about it. Fast forward through some idiot shenanigans and conversation to true dark. Laying in tent, dogs inside with us. Suddenly the younger one goes berserk, a few seconds before the other one joins in. Making jerks between sides of the tent, which is relatively large to service 3 men and 2 dogs, just pacing around it, growling, barking, hackles up, they look like monsters. I've never seen these dogs quite like this, it's full on defensive, offensive posture. Genuinely thought they were going to attack us for a few seconds, before I got awake enough. Smell of garbage and sulfur is back, though faint. Dad wakes up, Nick and I can smell it but he doesn't seem to be bothered, and we don't mention it and neither does he might have smelled it but who knows, don't think he did at that point. Steps outside the tent, dogs run out in front of him the very millisecond the door unzips, and begin pacing the length of the tent and our little camp area. Dad puts their leashes on and says well we may as well go now. Didn't get as much of a nap as I wanted but it's about midnight. Fucking Dad and his fucking naps. The dogs are still on defend and destroy, red alert 9000 or some shit, looking around erratically, constantly pulling against the leashes. Finally my dad snaps at them to heel and shut up and they do so, albeit still grunting and growling. We all piss into the desert sands like men, and one of the dogs loosens his lizard too. Grab the headlamps and 2 flashlights and we're off, Dad carrying a .22 pistol, Nick holding the other one. Nick moment, holy shit. This is so cool. Nick's parents never gave him guns, in hindsight it was probably autistic to give him one but he's not a retarded guy and it's a fucking .22. I, of course, proudly bear the .22 rifle. We head north, it's a pretty simple walk back to the grove, dogs are still not pleased by this venture. Breaking Greentext to talk about my dogs a bit more, and my dad, myself, and Nick, physically. Max was slightly smaller of the two, and a few years older. He wasn't as quick on the draw, ever, but was still a very sturdy and reliable animal. He made you feel safe, but was generally more high-strung. Beaver was the larger and younger of the two, laid back, but was trained from puppyhood to be a god among animals. I'm about 5'9", was back then, too, and Nick was around 6 foot. We were both fit from soccer. Dad's about 5'11" and didn't age the best, but was still muscular. Everyone gets a potbelly. Max seems the most irritated, constantly breaking focus to bark once or twice before hushing on his own, and Beaver is a silent asshole, minding the leash but on tenterhooks of aggravation. We get to the grove and the garbage, burn smell is about 3 times as bad as when we were there the first time. The dogs straight up refuse to go in. Like, they actually refuse, they dig their heels in and Max begins growling and staring, before lurching back and forth as if unsure if he wants to bum rush the grove or stay put. Dad sighs and looks around, we can't leave them on their own because it's the desert in the middle of the night, but Dad doesn't want us out here alone. Oh, we can run in on our own and check, you're only a few 100 feet away anyways. Okay son, don't be long, I'm gonna sit down and look for constellations. Not sure if worst dad or best dad, but he's my dad, so it counts for something. Those few 100 feet become very long when you're behind gnarled wood and rock formations. In a shadowy black world, and you turn around and all you see is a lone light from a headlamp. Nick and I, however, emboldened by our guns and teenage idiocy, pressed on through and towards the smell. This time we really did make an effort to be quiet, almost crawling in the dark, our lights all off except one flashlight, which he held having only a one-handed gun. Behind the beginnings of the grove, however, that teenage strength began to fail me just a little. The putrid smell, the eerie darkness, and the lack of Dad made me somewhat unnerved. By our low light we estimated we were maybe 20 feet away from the area of the den. We were correct. However, we had to creep around to the front, having approached it from the back. Breaking Greentext here. As we cleared the backside of the den and were in the front, we heard a crack from nearby, as a very odd white creature fucking sprinted, almost too fast to notice in the low light, about 10 feet in front of us and into the den. If it wasn't for it being so white, the light might not have even caught it, and we might played the crack off as an owl or other bird and been unaware that the den became occupied in front of our eyes. We did, however, both notice, and I kindly thank my dad for always preparing us with flashlights and other gear on journeys. The thing was rather tall, and not especially broad as it was long, but then, at first, we only caught the side view in low light. We froze, and here comes the part that haunted me for 2 years, almost every night, before it passed, and what has recently resurfaced. It all happened very quickly from here, and I'll try to not exaggerate details. Nick and I continued to get close, but this time, both of us had a round chambered and were pointing the guns at the den. We made our way until we were about 5 or 6 feet away from the entrance, and then flipped on our headlights. Don't know why we did that. I think it was our intent to startle it and be able to see it and then run. It was very startled, and let out a very disgusting, screeching growl bark. Like a short boot that most canines do, but very ugly sounding. It was also higher pitched, and sounded like there was spit and snot behind it. It was very apparent to us at that moment that this wasn't a coyote. We bounced back a few feet, and the creature didn't emerge. We could still see it, but it was moving around inside the den in a bit of a frenzy. It made the scream growls a few more times, and Nick and I unanimously began to yell to each other to fucking run, dude. That was probably the biggest mistake of the night, but thankfully, neither of us suffered for it. What we should have done was open fire the minute we realized it wasn't a coyote. The second we turned and ran, I could hear sand and bone rattling and being tossed as it ran out after us. Nick squeezed off a few random shots, I think out of fear, and I managed to get up into a tree, about 5 or 6 feet in the air. Nick was right behind me, but instead chose a rock formation, about 10 feet away. He played forward, after all, so his sprints were harder than mine, and I think he just wanted to run at that moment. The white creature pursued Nick, backing off whenever he turned, and then leaping along after he looked away. It was a dangerous game that only took a few seconds to play, but it unfolded in slow motion for me. Nick popped off the rest of the .22 clip, and then the white creature began to scale the rock. I wasted only a second more before leveling the rifle and firing blindly. I could have hit Nick. I'm glad I didn't. I did, however, scare the white thing, or at least attract it. It left Nick and then bark screamed at me, leaping off the rock. I began shimmying up the tree, and in the darkness, I cracked my head against a branch sticking out directly over me. The mongrel began to climb the tree below me. In a daze, my vision blurring a bit, I popped another 2 or 3 shots. The clip of the rifle only has 6 rounds, and I kept that in mind. Figured I only had 2 left, as I wasn't counting very well, and didn't want to be overconfident. Nick's yelling at something, maybe the white creature, but then I hear a different pitch of scream. Nick just fucking threw the gun at the white creature, and hit it. Not hard, but those metal bastards weigh a couple pounds, and later on I realized why it hurt. Again, this whole sequence took maybe 30 seconds, but it felt so much longer. Then, as the thing is looking to climb again, I see it go flying off of the tree trunk, Beaver, Max, and Dad came to the gunshots and yelling, my dad several seconds behind. Beaver has just ripped the mongrel off of the tree by slamming into it and grabbing it. I'm unsure how many of you are dog people, but German Shepherds have very boxy, broad chests and shoulders. If they leap at and their teeth miss, they will still knock you flying a few feet if they intend to. In this moment, time seems to totally slow down. Even in the nightmares, this particular sequence plays out very, very slowly. Nick and Dad are yelling, Max and Beaver are snarling and yelping, and my conked head vision is starting to clear. The headlamp clearly illuminates this thing as it tries to deal with the dogs. It stands up. It's not quadrupedal, it's bipedal, and for 2 or 3 seconds, I got a very clear image that's burned forever into my head. It's tall, maybe 7 feet, and skinny as hell. I mean scrawny. Long forearms, long hind legs, all of it built like a dog. Somehow, even though it's so thin, I can't make out bones, but maybe it's the flashlighting and the white fur that's obscuring it. It's blisteringly white, stained now with red, either my dog's or its own blood. The neck is rather long, and it has a very long, pointed muzzle and face. No discernible ears or facial features. There's a gangly little tail, and its eyes and nose appear to be black, but I could be wrong on the eyes in the circumstance. It had teeth, but I couldn't tell what kind. The forearm, paws, hands, whatever, had fairly long digits and there were short claws on the end. I less saw them and more heard them make contact with the dogs. Overall, the thing most resembled a whippet or a greyhound in how skinny and long it was, and the face. It was built like a canine, as well, but it definitely stumbled around on 2 legs to get the advantage on the dogs, for many, many seconds. It wasn't just rearing, it was balanced like that, and its back and chest were appropriate for it. It looked natural to see it on 2 legs, basically. Again, I'm unsure if you're familiar with German Shepherds, but when they bite hard. They're the 3rd or 4th hardest biting dog in the world, pound for pound, if I remember correctly. When they bite down, they don't let go. Beaver, at least, had some great purchase on this thing's arm and heard a loud crack and the most horrific bark scream released. Max was just snapping and ripping into whatever he could grab, I think. Dad didn't shoot, I don't think he wanted to hit the dogs, and I didn't either, so I didn't waste my shot. The dogs did good work, and I don't think this monster even wanted to fight, but we walked up on its house in the middle of ass-fuck nowhere. Hear a more normal yelp and Max's head gets drizzled in blood. The ugly thing flails and Beaver drops a few feet to the ground, as it had been swinging the dog a bit. It screamed again and then sprinted on its hind legs, and lost sight of it after it left the grove. This is where the nightmares ended, at least. Max's ear had a hole in it, towards the middle, and had likely been bitten. It bled a lot but was minor, and he's had far worse. Beaver was unscathed. Thankfully, overall, none of us were really hurt. Blood was all over the clearing, and in both dogs' mouths. I crept down from the tree, and Nick got off the rock spire. I landed on the .22 handgun, where it had been thrown and knocked into the mongrel. Picked it up, shoved it in my pocket, and ran to my dad, too scared to cry. Nick was shell-shocked, as well. The dogs gave pursuit but my dad called them back. None of us said anything, really. We walked back to the campsite. I don't remember ever putting the rifle down, and Dad still had a fully loaded gun. The dogs were still aggravated, but seemed quieter, as if they believed the fight was over. We all stayed awake, sitting outside of the tent, my dad and I clutching guns, Nick just staring. Come dawn, we packed up and marched out, still not talking about it. When we got back into town, my dad looked at us in the back seat and said it was some kind of diseased coyote, and to not worry about it. We nodded, not really knowing anything else to say. None of us believed it. It was a short encounter, relatively, but we were all scared out of our minds, because that tall-ass white faggot wasn't a damn coyote. Nick and I neglected to really keep in touch once soccer season ended, and by then I had gotten a job, so I didn't sign up again. I tried to bring it up to Dad once, but he just shook his head and told me to stop thinking about it. We've never talked about it since. I've been out to the Badlands a few times since then, because I still love it, and my dad has too, having once been a part of search and rescue a few years ago. We've never seen anything, and though we don't mention it, we make a point to never go anywhere within 10 miles of the grove. I would really have loved to not ever think about this again, and for a few years, I haven't. I'm 20, now, and the last 2-ish years, it's mostly faded from memory. But in the past week, the nightmares are resurfacing, likely because of stress from other things in my life, and I need to talk this out somewhere, so I put it here. So that concludes my story, X. If anyone has had a similar experience with that white hellspawn, or has questions, I'll probably be awake another hour or so. X moves slow, and I'll be back in the thread tomorrow. Beaver's older, but is still healthy, and Max's ear healed fine. He's past elderly now, and missing most of his teeth, but both dogs made it out okay, for those concerned. What you found was just a mod for Skyrim. No, it definitely wasn't a werewolf or anything similar. I've looked at all the descriptions. I put years into this thing and I have no idea, still, what it was. The only things it resembles aren't canine at all, really. That seems about right. I know it was in range of a clusterfuck like that, but after looking on the maps and the satellite view, it's difficult to pinpoint it more exactly than that. It's probably fairly accurate. I'd have to get out there to be more exact, and bear in mind it's been a long time since I've been out near the grove. He did, like I said, the sequence of events was very short. He came. Pick also related, sort of. It's the dog breed this thing most resembled. That type of really skinny build and long neck and head. No ears, though, still. May have had them, but I didn't see any. Going to actually get to work on the sketch now. Someone can work with this, right? Anyone. Polish the basic idea, make it more. Not shit. Trips here, with the drawing I promised. Can you give me more details on it? Which of the hands is right, a better pose, too canine or too human? Skinny enough? I'll do a better sketch in a better pose. But I'll need more info, and to be out of class, to do that. Fuck, man. I got shivers looking at it. That's really close. The correct hand would be about a mix of the two, shorter digits than the right, longer than the left. Not quite like fingers, but longer than normal animal toes. It's a bit too human, needs to be more on the canine side. The head looks nearly exact, but the body is too human. Is this closer? I tried to fix the orientation while still keeping it reasonably able to be bipedal. Is there anything else you can tell about it? On mobile, hope it doesn't stupid up the picture. That's about perfectly on it. That's so damn uncomfortable to look at.